Welcome back to the Momentous Sports Podcast. I am your host, Kyle Israel, and today I'm honored to be joined by none other than Marc Spiegel, the Atlanta-based entrepreneur and investor who has just made history by becoming the first majority U.S. owner in Liga MX down there in Mexico, acquiring Querétaro FC, which I am butchering the name of. I'll refer to it as QFC going forward today, in what was a nine-figure deal. Marc's path is fascinating. From co-founder of Rubicon Global, a tech and data-driven logistics company built from the ground up that he took public, and he's now applying that entrepreneurial discipline to the world of soccer. He's not just buying a club, he's stepping into a legacy market that is on the rise, but that carries complexity, culture, and real challenges at times. In this episode, we'll walk through his background, the decision, and the journey to buy a club in Mexico, what stood out about QFC, and how he plans to merge real estate, fan experience, and football operations, and what it all means for sports as an investable asset class. So with that, let's get into it. Marc Spiegel, thank you for joining us today. Where are you today? Are you in Atlanta? Are you in Mexico? Where in the world?
In Atlanta. I've been to Ecuador and New York in the last 72 hours, so happy to be back home.
I'm glad that we got you hopefully with enough rest to give us insight, which you always give me personally when we have conversations. So I'm excited for the conversation. Before we get into soccer and your current deal, which was a big deal, is a big deal in Liga MX, I wanted to dive in a little bit into your past and explore the entrepreneurial journey that you took. You were the founder of Rubicon Global. You scaled that into a publicly traded company, which is a feat in and of itself. And I'm curious, through that process, through that work, is there anything that you learned that you are bringing with you today into, the sports asset class and owning a club like QFC?
I think, with any entrepreneur, business is business. It looks different and it's in different industries, but ultimately, I think one of the characteristics that an entrepreneur has is oftentimes you're going to have questions that you don't know the answer to. And rather than saying, I don't know the answer, there's kind of a mindset where I trust myself to figure it out. And so obviously, we did something that was brand new at Rubicon. There wasn't a playbook for it. And, for you, obviously coming from football, we essentially created a new offense from scratch while playing a game. And, here, obviously getting into club ownership, it's an asset class from an investment perspective. I hadn't been in it, but, there's that same, that same mindset that we can certainly figure this out. And I'm fortunate enough to have, a ton of people that I've met through the process who are experienced in the space and really, I think one of the cool aspects is people tend to really allow you to pick their brain and are very open and honest and willing to have conversations. And so that's actually much easier than it was when we were in the tech space where everything is a guarded secret. Here, there are secrets, but I think there's general willingness to provide insight that's been awesome.
Well, I mean, that's what you've been to me, and I'm very thankful of the time that you've spent with me and kind of giving me your perspective as we do our work at Momentous. So you've carried that legacy on and you've paid it forward. I also want to double click quickly on I believe you founded or a part of founding the NIL collective at the University of Louisville, 502 Circle. Curious what got you in or interested in that space, and if it helps shape your thinking around athlete employment. Right now, you've got guys that are on the pitch working for you. Those athletes are a core asset for any organization, both at the university level and the professional sports level. So maybe how did you get into that space, and was there any learnings that came from that you can apply today to the guys that are out there working hard for you on the pitch?
Yeah, I wish there was, some long drawn out story, but honestly, in I think November of 2020, remember 21 or 22 at this point, the last few years have kind of flown by, but, I grew up in Louisville, was a Louisville fan and was very frustrated with the direction of the athletics program. And so I had wrote a letter to the athletic director and to the president of the school. And little did I know the week that I wrote that, both of them resigned. So I'm not sure if they ever read it. I don't think that my letter was a reason for resignation, but that was really the impetus for me to say, hey, I'm raising my hand. I want to be, part of the future, not sit here and wallow in mediocrity or misery. And really, a few months went by. I happened to be at a Atlanta Hawks game with my neighbor, and there was who would soon be a first round lottery pick in the NBA sitting in the suite next to us. And I made a random comment, like, I heard they pay well at, I won't name the school, but I heard they pay quite well. And his dad starts laughing and said, hey, they don't, but there was a group, they call themselves the Collection. They paid us quite well. And so I didn't think anything of it. And then I think 3 days later, I'm taking my daughter to a volleyball event. And I pop on the radio here in Atlanta, and they're broadcasting from the Georgia spring football game. And there's this new entity that was created on the radio called the Classic City Collective. And I'm listening to them, and I'm like, collective, this has got to be the same thing. So I called our athletic director at Louisville at the time, and I was like, do we have one of these? He said, no, a couple people have chatted. So, I went home and talked to my wife, and I was like, hey, what do you think of this? And she basically said, look, sports, business, tech, like, this seems like something you can do. The only downside was we were leaving to go out of the country for the summer in like 3 weeks. And so, I was like, how do we do this in 3 weeks? But really, the genesis of it was I'm super competitive, and it was really frustrating. For the first time, people outside coaches, outside athletics could really have an impact on what, shaping programs or improving programs. And, I think for me, it was more full circle, because when I was a junior in college, I wrote a paper, it was an economics paper. It said, you can't pay the grocery bill with a degree. And it was all about why athletic scholarships are not a form of compensation. You obviously couldn't tell somebody at Kroger or Publix or Wegmans or wherever you are, hey, I want to pay my bill for my food with my scholarship. And I was a big fan. That was 2000, 2001. So I've been in favor of athletes getting paid. And obviously, as the industry continues to boom, and you're now looking at, well into the $10+ billion a year college sports industry, really felt like athletes should get their fair share, and still feel like they should get more than they're getting right now. But, to be able to start an organization to help the University of Louisville, was awesome. I'd be lying if I said it didn't give some experience in what we're doing right now with soccer. I think the payroll we had at Louisville is more than what we have in Querétaro. But it kind of allowed us to use, data and analytics to help, identify talent and reduce the number of misses you have in the recruitment process. But really, dealing with agents, dealing with players and families. I didn't do a ton of that. We have a staff who did it, but really creating the structure and then implementing it. I think it was pretty cool. We implemented it, and then the football coach left to go to the University of Cincinnati. We hired a new coach. Crush the transfer portal. Go to the ACC championship game in year one. Men's basketball has the 2 worst years by a long shot in the program's history. Completely refresh the team, 0 players coming back, go to the ACC championship game in year one. And now, preseason top 10. So, I feel like we've done something. We've been recognized a lot as being trendsetters, but I think the experience is there's a lot of correlation to what we want to do at Querétaro, because, we built a brand from scratch. We implemented data to help drive decision-making. We managed a budget. And all of those things are important, no matter if you're, in the NFL or Liga MX, or, even, you own a paddleball team. It's all the same thing. It's business at the end of the day. And you want to do whatever you can to get a leg up and be as efficient as possible.
Well, that answer reminded me back in my playing days, where in 2006 and 2007, I was playing a football game on Saturdays and then going to work at Planet Smoothie on Sundays just to have a little extra money in my pocket, or working the door at a bar in the off season. So it's come a long way, and I agree that players should be compensated for what they bring to universities.
And I
You found
actually,
Ruby.
even now, Kyle. I mean, I think with changes with rev share, um, I think it's good, but it's bad. I think what the NCAA has done is try to again wrangle, control, and limit and do a bunch of things where a year ago I think it was actually a much cleaner environment where players were, everything was contracted and it was, free market and negotiations. And now, with the $20.5 million cap and everything, running a different way, there's a lot of cheating going on already, and it's actually much worse now than it was a year ago. And so hopefully, the NCAA and I think the students need representation. They need a seat at the table. I'm
Yeah.
in favor of them becoming employees. I think it can simplify things, but I think I don't know if I'm in I'm probably in the minority there, but I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done, or else the college sports market is going to suffer, I think, in the very near term.
Well, it'll be interesting to see, and I'll wrap this up on the college sports side. It'll be interesting to see for individuals like you and I, how does private equity become a solution for universities in the future? Where's the opportunity going to be? Who's going to make that market, right? Are you going to own things at the league level, the team level? Um, More to come there. We could have a whole entire episode on the NIL. Post founding Rubicon, you take them public. I don't exactly know what was the exit for you from Rubicon just in the day-to-day role, but you quickly, from what I understand, with your sports administration background, turned to, looking at purchasing a sporting club. And I guess I'll ask, how did that come about? What was the trigger mechanism that said, okay, I'm going to, because it's an arduous process finding a sports club that's worth investing in, and we'll get into that in the way that you've approached it, which I think is phenomenal. What was that mechanism for you to go, okay, I'm going to go this direction?
Yeah, I think growing up, I'm a public school kid from Louisville, and I was around sports a lot, but I'd be lying to everyone if I said ownership of a pro team was ever in the thought process. I had an opportunity to invest in was invited in to invest in teams in various sports, but really, after looking at that and realizing that wasn't something that was going to keep me busy. I was 42 years old, and just being a minority investor was, what will that take up 1 or 2 hours a month of my time?
Sure.
And, here I am, I've got two small kids and, would go stir crazy just being in the house all the time. But it started with a Google search of foreign ownership European soccer. And I think as an American, you're kind of naturally, your inclination is to look at Europe. And for us, it was England. We were guided there. And thankfully, we had our first deal fell through. Very, very thankful for that, because that started us really identifying what our investment thesis was going to be. And I said, if we're going to do something, let's not do it to do it. This is not an affinity play. I don't care about seeing my name in bright lights or in the media or anything like that. It's, we see sport as an asset class, and there's an inflection point either, I think coming in the very near term that sport outside the United States is really starting to professionalize and modernize, and being part of that, coming from the industry where we were that went through a huge metamorphosis while, we started in the waste and recycling space. There was the advent of sustainability, which was brand new. And so, with sport, a lot of these leagues that you look at and a lot of teams, even in big leagues that your listeners and viewers will, follow, I think we were very, very surprised at the lack of sophistication and the lack of I'd say modern business acumen that permeated. And you can look at that as a negative, but my mindset, it's always an opportunity. So
Yep.
after England fell through, we realized we didn't have the makeup to spend 11 million pounds for the right to lose 8 million pounds a year, which you see a lot in some of these soccer deals. But that was the start of it, and so really over the next 2 years, we looked at a couple hundred teams and leagues, first division, second division, some third division. Looked at a bunch of countries and really identified in our true investment thesis, which ultimately led us to Mexico.
What did, and I was going to call that out, I really can appreciate, from an investment seat myself, your ability to stay patient despite what the market may be saying to you, despite, team owners reaching out and probably pressing about your interest or willingness to invest. But you looked at 200 clubs, and you and I have had conversations about this and that process for you. Curious what that taught you about the landscape of global soccer, kind of generally. You alluded to some of that in that last statement, but then I would follow up with, when you looked at clubs kind of in the US, whether that be MLS, and let's talk soccer for now, MLS, USL, Europe, obviously, Latin America. Like, what stood out to you in terms of opportunity, the right structuring of deals, and the risk associated, through that process?
One of the things I wish people would have told me when we first started is how difficult these deals are and how often they fall through. I think the close rate in global soccer has to be like 10% or less. So it is very frustrating. We were patient, and we moved. We had another deal in Europe that got very far down the line and didn't materialize. But I think what it taught me is you've got to look at the club, but then you have to look at everything outside the club, things that are beyond your control. So, geopolitical, you look at things happening within a league, you look at the city, the transportation possibilities, the socioeconomic status of a city, the growth, all the things that we realize sometimes it's better to just be in the right place at the right time than having to pick the right racehorse and trust
Sure.
that racehorse does all the running for you. So we looked everywhere. I mean, we looked a lot in Europe. We've looked in South America. We've looked a bit in Asia, Australia. We looked in the U.S. and there's a lot of opportunities. MLS obviously is very, very expensive to get in right now. I think they've done a great job of building that business. And I think with the deal with Apple TV. I think the next generation of that will certainly be another growth lever that MLS will have. USL, there's a lot of opportunities. We didn't want to start something from scratch. So buying an expansion team or expansion rights was never really in the thought process. I have a couple friends who own teams in the league and are doing well and like it. Obviously then you have NWSL, which is certainly, along with the WNBA, is on a huge upward trajectory in terms of valuation and growth and audience. So certainly supportive. Women's sports, I think there's a lot of opportunity in women's sports, not just in the U.S., but in where we are in Mexico and Europe, obviously, as well. So it's really a hodgepodge, but we said, we can only control a certain amount of it. So how do we look for other ways to get lucky and have that turn into positive investment outcomes?
That makes sense. Were there any consistent type of red flags that were, hey, I see this, I'm walking away from the deal, like this doesn't make sense? Obviously, and it's not the case, fortunately, at QFC, but obviously, as you mentioned earlier, a lot of these clubs are. Let me frame it this way: when I have an opportunity, I'm trying to see, is there line of sight on break even? Like, can we get to a break even with this organization, or are we just going to eat up our basis by putting capital on the balance sheet to operate every year? Those are some big red flags in my mind. Just curious if it sticks out to you.
We look at that as well, and kind of another litmus test we take is, what will it take for us to double our investment outcome, right? What needs to happen? How many things need to happen? So you look at a lot of these deals, and I'm sure you get calls, but there's a lot of brokers and folks who are trying to help sell businesses or portions of teams, and they always paint the picture of how great the city and how the opportunity with the league and what happens if you get promoted and this and that. And I think what we realized is for success to happen, if 10, 12, 14 things all have to happen at the same time to be successful, it's probably not a good deal. So there are others, when we realized it wasn't about being in a specific league for us, it was about being opportunistic and being in the right league or in the right city. That was a huge turning point for us. There are certain countries that we just, we said we're not going to go to for certain reasons. But, when we became a bit agnostic as to where, then, I think Pandora's box really opened in a positive way for us.
Before we get into to QFC, because there's a lot to talk about there. One of the things that you and I have discussed in our conversation, something that I've seen starting to come across my desk on a regular basis now, is European basketball opportunities. And with the NBA talking about an expansion into Europe, there's just a lot more activity there. What's kind of your just quantitative perspective right now on where basketball is globally and where it may be going?
First, I love basketball, right? Probably my favorite sport. Grew up around it, love it, and unfortunately don't get to watch it. And thanks to two back surgeries, don't get to play it anymore either. But
Mm.
I think the NBA realizes, and they've done an amazing job really since David Stern of globalizing the game. I think along with soccer, there's no other game that's as global as the NBA and or in basketball, and the NBA has certainly taken that torch. And whether it's to Europe or Asia or Africa, I think there will be opportunities. The NBA is going to Europe. We know that. The NBA is already in Africa. I think that league will continue to evolve, but when you look at basketball, you look at a lot of these teams are certainly under monetizing. It's not about basketball in a lot of these deals. It's about arena utilization. It's about real estate. It's about brand growth. And when you see there are major cities, you asked about Europe. There are major cities in Europe with teams that some of which are owned by the soccer or football team. Others are independent, and they're just not realizing the potential and really operating as a modern business. You look at the ability to have concerts all year round. You look at what can you do from a ticketing perspective to expand your audience. How do you monetize it from a digital presence? All of these things that the NBA is amazing. I mean, we hired a longtime NBA vet to run our business at Querétaro, so you can obviously see the basketball influence on what we're trying to do. But the NBA sees that the rest of the world, the world is smaller than it's ever been, and it'll continue to get smaller. And so it's a big brand, and they're going to go over there, and they're going to be in major cities, and certainly believe it'll expand. I think the price tag that you hear to get a team is pretty high, but I'm sure there's a list of people who've certainly stepped forward and raised their hand and said, we want to be part of this. I think the same thing will probably happen in Africa as well when they privatize some of the teams there. What happens in Asia, basketball is huge in Asia. So, and there's certainly a pretty robust commercial environment already, especially as you talk to, about Japan, from supporting
Yeah.
baseball, supporting soccer. So I'm very bullish on basketball. I think that the more that the NBA is involved in working with FIBA and honestly, either pulls along EuroLeague or EuroLeague just says we can't compete with it, I think it's going to be better for the game from a commercial perspective globally.
I think that's really, really helpful context. I'm interested in seeing what that actually looks like. Like, what is NBA Europe, right? And what is the format? All right, let's dive into the nuts and bolts of Querétaro. I think I said it closer to correct that time. Um,
You've
you
been
look,
working.
well, I've been trying to, although I like to go to QFC. You
Yeah.
look at all these clubs, you look at all these leagues in all these various countries. You ultimately make the decision to pursue QFC. In Mexico, others have called it the Austin, Texas of Mexico, which is unique in and of itself, right? One of those components you look at is the city. What stood out? Was it the timing? Was it the market? The brand itself? What were the things that were in place that gave you conviction to pursue it?
Once we started studying Mexico and the Mexican League, and I think us as Americans, I mean, Mexico is such an important part of our culture. I talk about my first job was at a Mexican restaurant when I was 14 years old. So I think there's a bit of first full circle there, but you start looking at the league, and it jumps off the page in terms of growth potential. It jumps off the page in terms of how does it activate the 40, 50 million fans in the United States, which is a growing and already very, very powerful economic engine from a GDP perspective. And then the connectivity to the United States in terms of businesses and brands. So when we said, hey, Mexico was extremely intriguing for us, let's really dig in and study it. And as we studied it, we got more and more excited. It seemed like everywhere we looked, there's opportunity. And again, as an entrepreneur, you can't ask for a different or a better situation. So Querétaro was one of 4 or 5 teams that we looked at. I think honestly, it was the one city that I had never heard of before. And so first time we went there, we had this, oh my God, experience where it was just different in a good way from what we expected. And we didn't really have an expectation, but I describe it as you talk to somebody on the phone and you hear their voice and then you see them and, they're like, you look different than you sound. Well, you didn't really know what you thought they'd look like. It just looks different. And with Querétaro, it's such a modern city. There's so much growth. There's cranes. There's buildings going up. There's a bunch of residential communities being built, and it just had the feel of the up and coming city. And then you look at what's going on economically, and it's a hub of international business, and so many businesses are moving into the city and have been for the last decade. That's why you hear that connection to Austin. It's really a similar type growth story. And then when you look at an airport that you can connect to most major cities in the United States with daily flights, I mean, that's a great selling point. So when we really settled on it and we said, this is the one, we're diving in, we're going head first. This is the one where we're planting our flag, and couldn't be any happier with our decision. Now, it wasn't easy, right? We did a lot of diligence and took our time, and very thankful to the previous owner for working with us to make sure we were as comfortable as we could be. But it's a great opportunity. And in the league, I think what's going on and what will happen in the next 3 to 5 years in the league is unparalleled, really, as you look at the global soccer landscape. So it's an amazing opportunity. And now 2+ months in, a lot of work, right? Nothing in life is that's worth anything. It's easy. So we're rolling up our sleeves, but the people within the league, the people in the city and in the state of Querétaro, the government, the businesses have really welcomed us with open arms, and that's been a major blessing.
Yeah, it's been interesting. I was wondering how that would go for you because you are the first, chairman of a club that's an American investor and majority owned, unless I'm wrong, but I believe that's still the case. Um, Obviously, as investors, you and I are expected to understand or at least have line of sight on like all the potential challenges that could exist where things could go wrong. Um, and when you hear Mexico and how people think of Mexico, and I know this is a public forum, so I'll be very careful in how I ask this question. Were there just reputational elements of Mexico and how business is done there that you had to get comfortable with? And if so, how did you?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there's stigmas wherever you go. I can tell you that doing business in Mexico and this process was much, much easier than what we faced in our 2 deals that we got far down the path in Europe. Much easier. It's much more akin to what we're used to in the US in terms of format, in terms of legal, just tax structure, all of those things. So I think it's more so people are naturally, naturally, it's hard to really be totally open to something that you don't know. And so what I would tell everyone watching and listening is, don't make your judgment based on, what someone else says. Really go there and touch it and feel it, and get to know it, and then let that guide your decision making. So for us, we love the business side. You look at it on paper, and there's a lot to like. We loved the story of things that are happening at the league level and things that will happen at the league level. But really, when we got down there, and we kind of lived for a few days and talked to people. And I remember walking down the street one morning, and I was going to get some breakfast, and I just stopped somebody and said, "Hey, are you from here?" And they said, "Yes." I said, "How do you like it?" They said, "Love it. Wouldn't live anywhere else." They asked, "Was I from the States?" I said, "Yes." They asked me, "Are you moving here?" And I said, "Maybe." And they smiled. I asked somebody else at a restaurant the same day who had just moved from Mexico City as a lawyer, and had grown up and been in Mexico City their whole life. And I said, "Well, why did you move to Querétaro?" And they said, "The quality of life here. This is a great place for families." And so as we look at what do we want the team to look like, we want coming to our games to be very family oriented, a place that's it's entertainment, it's an event, it's more than just watching soccer for 2 hours. It's being part of a community. And I think one of the really cool aspects, if I'm able to draw a parallel, is it really feels like a college city, not a college town, but a college city that is supporting their team, like University of Nebraska, where it's the only game in town. And for us, it was important for us to really reach out to the community, who I think some of them had been disgruntled a bit over the last few years in what's gone on, but we know that they are the most important part. So whether it's the young family with two small kids, it's the empty nester, it's the young professional who's moved there for a job, it's the international community. We couldn't find another place that had those dynamics, and then doing it in a place that is literally, I think, either the fastest or second fastest city in terms of economic growth in the entire country. It was a great equation for us.
I'm going to get into the real estate component here in a little bit, and the ideation around that. Obviously, that's part of our core thesis here at Momentous. But just I'm always interested in the human experience, and so it's been a handful of months now. From one day to the next, you become the chairman of the club. You do the photo shoot on the pitch, all those things that kind of are a finish line and a starting line, both at the same time. I'm curious, like, just what the first couple months have been like. You guys are obviously in season. You had a big win on the road recently over a good opponent. Like, what are some of the core things within the business of the club that you're focused on improving, kind of here at the beginning?
Everything. We have a mentality of, if you're not getting better every day, you're getting worse, because others are getting better. So, really, when you split the business, you split it into commercial and sporting. We made, our plan was within the first month to make hires of the leaders of both of those parts of the business, which we did. We brought in Pepe Escamilla from the NBA on the commercial side, and Alvaro De La Torre on the sporting side, who had success at his two previous stops, and really is a dynamic young leader. We retained Mariana Acosta, who is leading up our finance and is amazing. She's kind of the queen of the club. So really having that continuity is important, as she's been there through the ups and downs. But for us, it's how do we reignite the fan base? How do we get them back in the stadium? How do we get them enjoying being part of the Gallo community, the White Roosters, the Gallos Blancos, as we're known? And it's giving them a reason to be optimistic. Was certainly something that we wanted to come out of the gate and communicate, and kind of open ourselves up to them, and not feel like that. We don't take for granted that their support is a sure thing. We have to win their respect and win their trust and admiration. On a sporting side, we believe in data and analytics. We've made a number of changes and added a lot of players to the team in a short time period. We've improved. You mentioned a road win, which we had over the weekend. We drew last night with on the road with a team who was in first place. So this is coming from, a week ago, if we're having this conversation, we had won one game and hadn't tied. And now we're moved up a couple spots in the table and have a lot of positive energy, which, this is, 2 months into a building process. So it's not going to happen overnight, but it was important for us to see some positivity. I think, we certainly want to engage. The Querétaro has a big university population. So we want to make sure, even if we're not the first team for some of those young adults, we want them to know that they have a place in our stadium and in our community to be part of something. So I think as you hear me describe it, it's very similar to, somebody coming in as a new athletic director to a program and saying, hey, I want to hire I'm going to hire my two coaches of the two biggest programs and really change a culture. But I think doing it, we were certainly cognizant that we are coming into their territory, and we have to embrace the cultures and the norms of that city and that state and the league, rather than necessarily impart our ways on them. I think that's something where you see ownership fail in cases around the world, where it's kind of a know-it-all mentality. And for us, our goal there is we are stewards of that club, and
Yeah.
understanding that club is the center of that community, and we're going to make it better, so that whenever we leave it, if we do leave it, it's better than it was when we got there.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think it's an important and often overlooked point. It's one of the things that I kind of try to instill with our team on a regular basis is yes, you may own a piece of this team, you may own control of the club, but ultimately the fan experience and the fans and the people supporting are the ones that you have to have top of mind. And it almost, I've always been a leader that's kind of led through servant leadership. And I feel like in sports, that's like, one of the best ways to show up because, candidly, I have seen American investment groups, whether it's large PE firms, whether it's, just independent sponsors who come in like bulls in a china shop, whether that's in the Europe or other leagues around the world where, you're coming in and impacting somebody's religion and how they care about that organization, how they've supported that organization for decades. And so I think it's important, in particular for the American groups, when you go international and all of a sudden you have this asset that has this long legacy, like you've got to be aware and mindful of how you show up and the feeling that you provide to these fan bases. Because, if I were them, I would look at an outside ownership group that, doesn't live in the city, that's had no connectivity to the club in the past, through a skeptical lens initially. And I think it's on the owners and the leaders of those organizations to do that the right way, for sure.
Agree with you wholeheartedly. I mean, our team is celebrating its 75th year, so it's not like it's something new that doesn't have a long-standing legacy and history. And the city where we are is where the Constitution was signed in Mexico, and it's historic city with a colonial part of it that dates back well before the United States was even a country. So it's like we understand the tremendous responsibility. We embrace that, but again, the people have been awesome, and the energy, the encouragement. Everybody just wants folks who come in and really care about them and care about the team and care about the community, and we do. So there's a genuine factor that we can certainly bring to that table.
All right, Mark, I've got two more questions before we get you out of here. Obviously, from our conversations here at Momentous, we're very focused on that intersection of sports and real estate. I've taken a look at your stadium numerous times now. I recognize that it's a little bit older stadium. So I'm just curious from your perspective, as you're thinking about the sporting side and all with the focus being there right now, what is salient to you? What are you thinking about in regards to the stadium itself, whether that be renovation, the development of a new stadium, or even potentially mixed use real estate around it? Just curious how you're processing that today.
Yeah, well, first I appreciate, because I was born. Our new stadium was built after I was born, so if it's old, that means I'm old as well. But look, I think I'm not a real estate guy, but I think anybody who is owning a team, especially one of medium or larger size, has to understand that real estate could be a lever that could add significant value, and not just value from a valuation perspective, but also enhance cash flow. Um, if you're like us, we play in a stadium that's owned by the government, right? We have a great lease, amazing people at the government. We have a training facility that's owned by the government. So thinking about it, those are conversations that that we've had to say what could happen, what could this be, and I think in an era where you see so many places in the U.S. where you have mixed use developments, where you have a stadium or an arena that's the focal point or centerpiece of all of it. There are just so many events, and there's so many other revenue streams that could be had if you have something like that. Now, if you look around the world, we're blessed in the U.S. to have mostly new facilities, and if it's not new, it's even been upgraded. You look at a Wrigley Field or a Fenway Park or places like that. Like, you still have a high level fan experience when you attend one of those events. But you go around the world, and most of the stadiums are not updated. Most of the stadiums, you would not say, have all of the creature comforts. And then around them, many of them are tucked into neighborhoods, and there's really no way you can have a development plan. But some you can, and I think you'll see over the next decade more and more developments outside the United States that resemble what we've seen in the U.S., where you have restaurants, you have shopping, you have office space, you have apartments, condominiums, because these are mini cities, and you're having 15, 18, 20 home matches a year. We have 17, and then if we make the playoffs and we're fortunate to host, it would go up. We have women's games. I think as women's soccer continues to grow, attendances continue to grow. That's more opportunities for people to consume real estate around a stadium. And then I think, look, for us, we're just laying the foundation of the team. So, one of the things that we want to do is upgrade the fan experience and make it, as a family coming to a match or a supporter coming to a match, we want more amenities. We want to turn a 2-hour experience into a 4 or 5 hour experience. And whether that's tailgating in a parking lot, whether that's music before or after a game, whether that's in game with restaurant options, dining, food and beverage, club level premium opportunities, all of those things are part of what we think will have a positive effect in our city, and especially in Liga MX. But what that looks like, is that renovating current facilities? Is it building new facilities? All of that remains to be seen. But what I know is real estate oftentimes can be a very good investment. So even if people are not 1,000% into a team investment, I think being in a team that has real estate component or real estate growth components could return a very quality positive ROI.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's well said. And this is just Kyle's kind of off the top of my head, but you think about where sports is going from a cost perspective, right? And what it costs to get an entire family at a game. And I've continued to look into models and underwriting. Like, can you leverage the real estate to continue to provide access to the fan base, because of the revenue that the real estate can put off allows you to keep pricing and accessibility into the venues and games, perhaps at a mark that is still affordable, where you're not just having to constantly compete with the rising prices that you see across the globe. So I'm focused more on that today, and learning more. But I think that's one of the other elements that becomes compelling, as you get into a more institutionalized sports asset class, where any way you want to slice it. We'll go back to earlier conversation. You have to have the fan in mind, right? You have to have their experience in mind. Um, but
But
from
you
a
also, I think, in today's day and age, where even in the U.S., I mean, whether you're pro or college, one of the toughest things is getting people to buy tickets to come to
yeah,
games. There's more fans than there ever been, But if all we're focused on is kind of the 1985 model of evaluating success of how many fans come to a match, then we lose. I mean, we talk about, for us, we really have three different constituents. We have the people who are, hardcore. They come to every match, rain or shine. You have your people who come to matches, but not frequently. And then you have your people who are fans who support the team who never come. So what we've talked about commercially is how do we monetize all three of those constituents? And it's a different answer, a different solution or set of solutions for each one of those. But if people aren't focused on that, and even with real estate, I mean, that could be a part of a solution. Where I live in Atlanta, right up the road is where the Braves play, and they built a whole little mini city. And there are a lot of people who go to the Battery when the Braves are playing home games who don't ever walk into that stadium. They eat at a restaurant. They want that experience. They have kids playing in the green space with the game on the video board. So I think what we'll see, and I can speak for Mexico, but obviously in a lot of the research and conversations we've had over the last several years, I really see a similar path happening, across the global soccer space, where you've got to really upgrade the experience for fans to come. But for us, we have hundreds of thousands, if not a million fans, and how are we touching each of those in a way that is most common with the way they're going to consume. So that's where our job is, to really meet the people, not expect the people to meet us.
I love that. I love that, and I love how you've broken those three categories out because it's important to make sure that you're reaching all of them where they are. Um, Obviously, I want to get you out of here with one last question. There's a big event coming to North America next year, i.e., the World Cup, and I've read articles recently. I even think I sent you a video recently of how the World Cup and the growth of Liga MX may put Liga MX as the most interesting league or the top league in all of North America. And obviously, you're comparing that to the MLS. So that's really two statements there. But I'm just curious, generally, from Mark's perspective, what's the excitement like as it's related to the World Cup? How have you thought about the World Cup impacting the league, your club, as you were going through the process of the acquisition and what it would, hosting the event would mean for the future of these leagues? Just curious of just any general thoughts you have around the World Cup.
There's a lot of excitement. I know that the federation in Mexico and the league is kind of full steam ahead now. Inside a year, obviously Mexico has 3 host sites. A number of teams will be calling various cities in Mexico their home base. So, whenever you have huge global events, whether it's the Olympics, whether it's the World Cup, it's an amazing opportunity to showcase not just who you are from a sporting perspective, but who you are as a city and a country. And so, this event is obviously spread across, Mexico, the United States, and Canada. I think it's a tremendous opportunity, and we do big events really well. You have cities that are prepared, you have amazing venues, but within the league, I think some of the exposure it's going to bring to different parts of the world, it's different confederations. So you look at UEFA, not just CONCACAF or CONMEBOL, but you look at the teams from Asia coming, Australia, Oceania. I think it's more exposure is good, because that, if we do it the right way, can translate into eyeballs, commercial revenue after the World Cup. I see this. You're right. We obviously knew the World Cup was coming. It's an opportunity to capitalize. We are going to be running, events and things around it. While we obviously won't be playing, but we want to make sure that the people in our city and state and who support our team, feel involved in it. I'd say we have the opportunity with a couple of our players to be named to their various countries' World Cup teams. So we certainly are very hopeful that they stay healthy and they get that opportunity. We'll do whatever we can to support that. But look, if you don't see one of these events, and this is going to be the biggest World Cup ever, obviously more teams, but just in terms of eyeballs, in terms of commercial revenue, it will be the biggest by a long margin. And if we can't see that as a positive and take that as an opportunity to get better and capitalize on it, then we're in the wrong business.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I mean, you look back to the 90s with what the World Cup did for us and Brandy Chastain, right? I think it's seared into my head from when I was in middle school, that goal and her ripping her jersey off. And, for me, that was like the first anecdotal experience of like, wow, that is what soccer can feel like. Like I'm just an American football player, baseball player, whatever. And you would hope that those experience happen again for the future youth that are getting into the game. And I don't think it's an argument that there's more youth in U.S. soccer than ever before, and that'll only continue to grow. So
Look,
we're excited
I've
as
never
well.
been, Kyle. I've never been to a World Cup match. I've been to qualifiers
Hmm.
in both the U.S. and Mexico. The international competition, the atmosphere, the buzz, that just there's something about it. And from what everybody's told me, qualifiers are about 10% of what the actual World Cup will feel like. So the number of people coming, the number of visitors coming, just to experience our cities, the culture, the people, the hospitality. It's a great opportunity for all three of these countries, and I think my only hope is that all three teams that are hosting perform. Obviously, as an American, we haven't had the best last year or two in terms of the national team. Mexico, I think, has been a bit down. Canada's actually surged in this time, but I think all three of those teams playing on their home soil have an opportunity to do something great, and I just hope all three of them do.
The hair on my arm and back of my neck just stood up because for those that don't know, I'm here in Berlin, Germany, and last year we hosted the European Championships, and I live 10 minutes uh, from Olympic Stadium here where Hertha plays, and it was like whenever there was a match, you could just walk down the main corridor next to my house, and the amount of energy and people in the streets and just seeing it, I'm still getting goosebumps right now, seeing and feeling and touching that excitement. It's you don't like American football has a great tailgate environment, right? There's a lot of exceptional reasons to enjoy that, but the type of just raw passion that you see in football or soccer, um, I haven't seen anything else like it in sport. And so if we can have something close to the experience that I had last year, just I love to sit in a cafe and just watch the supporters walk by, up to the stadium. It was really cool. So if that's what it looks and feels like, I think it's going to be a great event
I just
for
have to
everybody
find a way to
involved.
get a ticket to a match. That's my goal.
Well, that's what I'll get us out of here on. If you guys have a ticket for Mark, reach out to us and we'll pass his information along. But listen, I know an hour of your time is really valuable these days with the work that you have and with what you're doing and leading your club. So we appreciate you taking the time to come out and give us some of your wisdom and perspective on the space. If anybody wants to reach out to you for whatever reason, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
I feel like today it's probably Twitter or LinkedIn.
Twitter.
So
I see you're active on Twitter.
yeah, I've got to do that. But no, I just want to also take a second to say thanks to you guys and what you guys have put together and obviously launched now. There's a humongous opportunity for the fund and some tremendous
Thank you.
people that you've brought in as you're leading this thing. So kudos to you because I know it is not easy getting one of these going and certainly not easy to find great deals and find great
No.
people. So I think you've done a great
Yeah.
job.
I appreciate it. It's a team effort and it's a relationship business. And, I like to focus on the team and the relationships and everything else kind of takes care of itself from there. It's not for the faint of heart, but it's worth it. And I think we're in a great space. And, as a result, I've met individuals like you who are growing into friends and even mentors for me. So the feeling is
It
mutual.
sounded like
Appreciate that.
what I just heard from you is a quarterback saying he couldn't do it without his offensive line.
Cannot do it without the offensive line. By far the most important people on a football field. O line and D line. Without that, it's just a really ugly game that doesn't make a lot of sense. But
I
yeah,
agree.
credit goes to the team, no doubt about it. I'm just here trying to make some plays when they present to me. So,
I
um,
appreciate you having me on, man.
yeah, absolutely. Okay, Mark, good luck this
Thanks.
weekend. Good luck with the future matches. Good luck with the rest of the season. We'll talk to you soon.
Appreciate it.